Sometimes the bravest people are the ones nobody notices until they decide to save a stranger. The music inside the velvet room drifted through crystal glasses and polished oak as hundreds of conversations blended into the familiar rhythm of another Friday night. Wealthy executives celebrated new contracts, politicians exchanged careful smiles, and visitors from across the city filled every corner of the exclusive lounge where appearances mattered almost as much as influence. Behind the long walnut bar, Alicia Brooks moved with quiet confidence, preparing handcrafted drinks with practiced precision. At 34 years old, she had spent nearly a decade working late nights, learning that the quickest way to disappear inside an expensive room was to wear a bartender's uniform. Most customers remembered the vintage whiskey they ordered, but never the woman who served it. Alicia never complained. Her father had taught her that honest work deserved pride whether anyone applauded it or not. She believed him every single day. A little after 9 o'clock, the atmosphere changed without anyone announcing why. Conversations softened. Security personnel standing near the entrance straightened almost instinctively. The heavy glass doors opened, and Damien Russo entered with the calm confidence of a man who never needed to introduce himself. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable, and his quiet blue eyes missed very little. He greeted the hostess politely, nodded to the elderly pianist playing near the fireplace, and even thanked the doorman before making his way toward a private table overlooking the entire lounge. Alicia had heard stories about Damien for years. Some called him one of the most influential businessmen in the city. Others whispered about the extraordinary loyalty he inspired. What everyone agreed upon was that he rarely raised his voice, and when he entered a room, people somehow began choosing their words more carefully. She prepared the drink listed on his standing order with the same professionalism she offered every customer. As she reached for the crystal glass, two men standing only a few feet away lowered their voices, believing the music would hide their conversation. Alicia had no intention of listening, but one sentence immediately caught her attention. "He will never finish that first drink," one man quietly said before glancing toward Damien's table. The other answered with a nervous smile. "Everything is already arranged." Alicia felt a chill travel through her shoulders. She carefully continued polishing the glass without changing her expression. A few seconds later, she noticed one of the men subtly watching the bartender assigned to prepare Damien's beverage. Something about their behavior felt wrong. Alicia looked back toward Damien. He was speaking courteously with the manager, completely unaware that several pairs of eyes seemed unusually interested in the drink waiting to be served. Her heartbeat became louder than the music surrounding her. She knew she could remain silent and probably finish her shift without consequence. She also knew she might never forgive herself if those whispered words meant exactly what they sounded like. Trying to appear completely calm, Alicia found a small guest receipt, turned it over, and quickly wrote 6 simple words with a black ink pen. "Don't drink it. Smile and leave now." She folded the note twice until it disappeared beneath her palm. Taking a slow breath, she carried the crystal glass toward Damien's table, placed it gently in front of him, and with one smooth motion slipped the folded paper beneath the coaster. Damien glanced down, unfolded the note without changing his expression, then slowly lifted his eyes to meet Alicia's. Before she could step away, his hand calmly closed around her wrist. Every nearby conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward them. Alicia's heart nearly froze as the entire lounge watched the powerful man refuse to let her leave, and not a single person could guess what he had just read. Damien did not tighten his grip. He simply held Alicia's wrist with calm steadiness while his other hand folded the small note and slipped it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket as though nothing unusual had happened. A polite smile appeared on his face, the same composed expression every guest expected to see. Around them, conversations resumed cautiously, but curious eyes continued watching from every corner of the lounge. Alicia struggled to keep her breathing steady. She had expected him to read the warning, perhaps quietly excuse himself, or even dismiss it as a foolish prank. She had never imagined becoming the center of attention in a room filled with some of the city's most influential people. Damien finally spoke, his voice calm enough that only she could hear. "Walk with me." Alicia looked at him in surprise. "Sir, I am working." Without releasing her wrist, Damien glanced toward the lounge manager and smiled. I need to borrow your bartender for 5 minutes. The manager immediately nodded. Of course, Mr. Russo. Nobody questioned the request. Damien slowly stood from his chair, leaving the untouched crystal glass exactly where it had been placed. To anyone watching, the scene appeared almost ordinary, as though an important guest simply wished to compliment an employee for excellent service. Damien even exchanged friendly greetings with nearby diners as he guided Alicia across the lounge. Every movement was deliberate. Every smile looked effortless. Yet Alicia noticed something she had missed only moments earlier. Damien never once allowed anyone to move behind him. His blue eyes calmly scanned reflections in polished mirrors, glass windows, and silver decorations while maintaining the appearance of complete relaxation. He was observing everything without appearing to observe anything. They reached a discreet hallway leading toward the private VIP exit used by special guests. As soon as the heavy wooden door closed behind them, the music from the lounge became distant. Damien immediately released Alicia's wrist. Are you hurt? He asked. She blinked in surprise. No, sir. Good, he replied quietly. I apologize if I frightened you. Alicia rubbed her wrist gently. There was no pain, only lingering confusion. I thought you believed I wrote the note to trick you. Damien shook his head once. If I believed that, we would not be standing here. He glanced toward a nearby security camera before lowering his voice. Inside that room, someone expected me to drink from that glass. The moment I walked away without it, they needed another explanation. Holding your wrist gave everyone one. Alicia frowned slightly. You wanted them to think you were upset with me. Exactly. Damien looked back toward the closed hallway door. If they believe you made a mistake serving the wrong drink or interrupted my evening, they will stop paying attention to the glass they expected me to finish. Alicia slowly realized what he had done. By making her appear responsible for an awkward misunderstanding, he had quietly hidden the real reason for leaving the table. Her warning remained secret. The people who had whispered near the bar would continue believing their plan had gone unnoticed. Damien studied her expression for a moment before asking the question that mattered most. Now tell me everything you heard. Alicia hesitated. She had replayed those whispered words countless times during the last few minutes, wondering whether she had misunderstood them. But looking into Damien's calm eyes, she knew silence was no longer the safer choice. She took a careful breath. It started about 20 minutes before you arrived, she said softly. 2 men ordered expensive bourbon, but they were not talking about the drink. They kept watching your reserved table. Then one of them said something I cannot forget. Damien remained perfectly still. Alicia swallowed once before repeating the exact words. He said, once he takes the first sip, everything else becomes easy. SUA, Alicia lowered her voice even further, almost afraid that repeating the words might somehow give them new life. He said, once he takes the first sip, everything else becomes easy. Then the other man laughed for only a second before reminding him to keep his voice down. Damien listened without interrupting. His face remained calm, but his attention never drifted for a single moment. He had spent years learning that truth often revealed itself in the smallest details, not in dramatic accusations. Did you recognize either of them? He asked. Alicia nodded slowly. I have seen them here before, but they are not regular customers. One wore a navy suit with a silver watch. The other had a dark green tie with tiny gold stripes. I never learned their names. Damien committed every description to memory. Did either of them approach the bar? Alicia answered immediately. No, they stayed near the corner table by the grand piano. They watched every bartender who walked past, but they seemed especially interested when my coworker prepared your usual order. Damien looked back toward the hallway door, as though he could still see through the walls into the crowded lounge. Did you actually see anyone touch the glass? Alicia shook her head. No, sir. I only heard what they said, and then I noticed them watching the drink before it reached your table. I could have ignored it. Maybe I misunderstood everything. But if I stayed silent and something happened because I was afraid to speak. Her voice faded before she finished the sentence. Damien studied her expression for several quiet seconds. There was no panic now, only honesty mixed with uncertainty. She was not trying to convince him with dramatic stories or exaggerated claims. She was simply telling him exactly what she had experienced. That alone made her words more believable than most people he encountered in boardrooms or private meetings. You took a considerable risk, Damien finally said. Alicia gave a faint smile. I only did what I hoped someone would do for my family. He noticed that answer immediately. It was not about him. It was about a principle she had chosen long before they met. Damien reached into his jacket, removed the folded note, and looked at the 6 handwritten words once more. The ink had already begun to smudge slightly from being folded in a hurry. Such a small piece of paper had changed the entire direction of the evening. He carefully returned it to his pocket. Do your co-workers know you left the bar with me? Alicia nodded. Everyone saw. Good, Damien replied. Then nothing about tonight should appear unusual after this moment. Alicia looked confused. What do you mean? Damien gave a slight smile. You are going back inside. You will finish your shift exactly as you always do. You will smile at every guest. You will take every order. If anyone asks why I held your wrist, tell them I believed you served the wrong drink and then realized it was my mistake. Alicia stared at him. That is not true. No, Damien answered calmly. But it is harmless, believable, and it protects the one person who decided to warn me. Before she could respond, another door opened quietly at the far end of the hallway. A middle-aged man in a dark suit stepped inside without making unnecessary noise. His posture was relaxed, but his alert eyes immediately met Damien's. The newcomer gave a respectful nod. Damien returned it with barely a movement. Daniel, he said evenly, I want everyone to believe my evening continues exactly as planned. Daniel understood without asking another question. Damien then looked back at Alicia. You have already done the difficult part. The rest is my responsibility. As Alicia prepared to return to the lounge, she noticed that Damien never once asked whether she was certain. He simply chose to trust the courage she had already shown, and somehow that quiet confidence steadied her more than any reassurance ever could. Daniel waited until Alicia disappeared back through the hallway before speaking another word. The distant sound of music floated through the closed doors, making it almost impossible to believe that anything unusual had happened. Inside the lounge, guests continued laughing over expensive dinners and polished crystal glasses, completely unaware that the evening had quietly changed direction. Damien adjusted the cuff of his jacket and looked toward the entrance leading back to the main dining room. We are not leaving, he said calmly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You want them to believe nothing changed. Damien nodded once. Exactly. If someone expected me to finish that drink, they are watching for a reaction. I will not give them one. Daniel understood immediately. During the many years they had worked together, he had learned that Damien rarely answered uncertainty with haste. He answered it with patience. What are your instructions? Daniel asked. Damien glanced toward the discreet security monitor mounted beside the hallway entrance. First, make certain no one touches the glass at my table. It remains exactly where it is until we know more. Second, review every camera covering the bar, the dining room, and the service hallway from 1 hour before I arrived until now. Third, quietly identify the 2 men Alicia described. Do not approach them. Do not question them. I only want names, business connections, and every person they spoke with tonight. Daniel gave a slight nod. It will be done. Damien stopped him with one final thought. And Daniel? Yes. No one outside this hallway is to know why we are doing any of this. Especially not Alicia. Daniel looked surprised. You are protecting her. She took a risk because she believed it was the right thing to do, Damien replied. If people connect her to whatever we discover, her ordinary life disappears overnight. I will not allow that. Daniel left through a separate corridor reserved for private security personnel, while Damien calmly returned to the lounge alone. The moment he stepped back inside, he became the same composed guest everyone expected. He greeted familiar faces with courteous smiles, thanked a waiter for fresh, sparkling water, and resumed polite conversations about charity events, business investments, and community projects. Anyone watching would conclude that he had simply changed his mind about drinking alcohol. Across the room, Alicia had already returned behind the polished walnut bar. Her hands moved with practiced confidence as she prepared cocktails, poured coffee, and greeted customers exactly as she had every other evening. Yet every few minutes, she caught herself glancing toward Damien's table. To her surprise, he never once looked in her direction. It was as though their private conversation had never happened. Slowly she realized that this, too, was intentional. The less attention he gave her now, the safer she remained. Near the grand piano, The two men she had overheard earlier exchanged a brief look before one of them checked his watch. Neither appeared alarmed. Neither hurried toward the exit. Instead, they continued their conversations with several guests, occasionally directing quiet glances toward Damien's untouched place setting. They seemed puzzled, but not suspicious. Exactly as Damien had hoped. Nearly 30 minutes passed before Daniel quietly returned, approaching Damien with the confidence of someone delivering routine business information. He leaned slightly closer and spoke in a voice no one else could hear. "We have names," he said, "and you were right. They are not strangers." Damien kept his pleasant smile as another guest congratulated him on a recent business achievement. Only after the guest walked away did he answer Daniel without changing his expression. "Tell me." Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the room ahead. "Both men are connected to someone you trusted for more than 15 years. For the first time that evening, Damien's calm blue eyes grew perfectly still because he realized the greatest surprise was no longer the warning Alicia had written. It was the name Daniel was about to reveal. SUA. Daniel waited until a server refilled the sparkling water before speaking again, making their conversation appear no different from an ordinary business discussion. "The two men are consultants employed by Eastbrook Financial Group," he said quietly. "On paper, they work for several investment firms. In reality, every major assignment during the last 6 years traces back to one individual." Damien did not rush him. "Who?" Daniel answered with visible reluctance. "Richard Ellison." Damien remained completely still. Richard Ellison had stood beside him through economic downturns, expansion projects, and countless negotiations. 15 years earlier, they had built successful companies together from little more than determination and long hours. Richard had attended family celebrations, charity galas, and community fundraisers. If Daniel's information was correct, the surprise was not simply that Richard's name had appeared. It was that Damien had never expected to hear it connected to secrecy. "How certain are we?" Damien asked. "Very certain," Daniel replied. "The security footage confirms the two consultants exchanged messages with Richard's executive assistant less than 10 minutes before you arrived. We also found records showing all three attended a private meeting this afternoon at Eastbrook's headquarters." Damien slowly lifted his glass of sparkling water but did not drink immediately. Instead, he watched the room reflected across its clear surface. Richard was not present at the lounge tonight. That absence suddenly carried more meaning than it had an hour earlier. "Continue watching," Damien said. "Do nothing that changes their behavior." Daniel nodded. "There is something else." Damien looked toward him. "One of our security specialists reviewed the service hallway cameras. About 15 minutes before your reservation, a catering employee entered the beverage preparation room, carrying an unopened delivery crate. He left less than 2 minutes later without the crate. Was he scheduled to be there? Damien asked. No. According to the manager, he finished his shift almost an hour before that. Damien quietly placed the untouched glass back onto the table. Every new detail strengthened the same conclusion. Someone had expected him to drink from that particular glass. Yet everyone involved seemed confident enough to remain inside the building. Confidence usually came from believing no one suspected anything. That advantage still belonged to Damien. Across the lounge, Alicia continued serving guests with remarkable composure. She greeted an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, recommended a non-alcoholic specialty drink to a designated driver, and thanked each customer with the same warm professionalism she had shown all evening. No one watching her would guess that she carried the weight of a dangerous decision inside her thoughts. Damien noticed something else. The two consultants occasionally looked toward his table, but after seeing him smiling comfortably with business associates, their expressions gradually relaxed. Whatever expectation they had formed earlier now seemed to be fading. They believed the evening was unfolding normally. That quiet misunderstanding was becoming Damien's greatest advantage. Nearly an hour later, several guests began leaving the lounge, collecting coats and exchanging handshakes near the entrance. Damien rose as well, thanking the host for another pleasant evening before preparing to leave. As he walked toward the exit, he paused briefly beside the bar. Alicia looked up, expecting only a polite farewell. Instead, Damien placed a generous tip beneath the receipt folder and said with complete sincerity, "Thank you for your excellent service tonight." Nothing more. No hidden message. No acknowledgement of the note. To everyone nearby, it sounded like ordinary courtesy between a guest and a bartender. Alicia smiled professionally and wished him a safe evening. Only after Damien disappeared through the front doors did she quietly exhale the breath she felt she had been holding for nearly 2 hours. Outside, cool night air greeted Damien as Daniel opened the waiting sedan. Before getting inside, Damien looked once toward the glowing windows of the lounge. "Tomorrow morning," he said calmly, "I want every financial record connected to Richard Ellison reviewed from the past 3 years. If trust has been misplaced, the truth will not stay hidden much longer." As the car pulled away into the city lights, neither man noticed that from an office window across the street, someone silently watched the sedan disappear and calmly reached for a telephone. The following morning arrived with clear skies over the city, but Damien's office carried the quiet intensity of people searching for answers instead of celebrating another successful business day. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline while Daniel organized stacks of financial reports, meeting schedules, security summaries, and archived partnership agreements across the long conference table. Nothing had been leaked to the public. Nothing had been reported to the authorities. From the outside, every company connected to Damien Russo continued operating exactly as it had the day before. That appearance was intentional. Damien believed that truth revealed itself more easily when people thought no one was looking. "What have we learned?" he asked as Daniel opened the first file. "Richard Ellison authorized 12 consulting payments during the past 18 months, Daniel replied. Each payment was approved through legitimate channels, but every consulting firm eventually transferred money to the same holding company. Damien studied the documents without speaking. "Who owns the holding company?" Daniel slid another folder across the table. "It is registered under a different name, but the directors are connected to the same 2 consultants who were inside the lounge last night." Damien slowly closed the folder. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Individual transactions appeared ordinary, yet together they formed a carefully hidden network of relationships built on secrecy rather than transparency. "Continue following the money," Damien instructed. "Do not accuse anyone until every fact supports the conclusion." Daniel nodded. "There is another development." He placed a small envelope on the table. Inside was a printed copy of the handwritten note Alicia had left beneath the coaster. The original remained safely stored, but the security team had preserved a duplicate for documentation. Damien looked at the 6 familiar words again before placing the paper back inside the envelope. "Has anyone contacted her?" he asked. Daniel answered immediately. "No. We kept your instruction." Her shift ended normally. She went home alone, returned to her apartment, and reported back to work this afternoon. Nothing unusual. Damien seemed quietly relieved. "Good." Daniel hesitated before asking the question that had been on his mind since the previous evening. "May I ask why you trust her so completely?" Damien looked toward the city beyond the windows. "Because she had every reason to remain silent." Daniel waited. "She did not know my position, my resources, or whether I would even believe her. She expected no reward. She only saw someone who might need help." He paused before continuing. "People reveal their character most clearly when kindness offers them nothing in return." Several miles away, Alicia tied on her apron and began another shift behind the familiar walnut bar. She had slept very little. Every customer who entered the lounge made her wonder whether the previous night's events had truly ended or whether they were only beginning. Yet she refused to let anxiety change the quality of her work. She greeted each guest warmly, remembered favorite drink orders, and smiled just as sincerely as she always had. Her coworkers joked about busy weekends and generous tips, completely unaware that one ordinary receipt had quietly connected her life to people she never expected to meet again. Late that afternoon, the lounge manager approached with an expression of polite surprise. "Alicia," he said, "a courier dropped this off for you." He handed her a small cream-colored envelope with no company logo and no return address. Inside was a handwritten card containing only one sentence. "Thank you for choosing courage when silence would have been easier." There was no signature beneath the message. Only a simple embossed crest she recognized from the previous evening. Alicia read the sentence twice before carefully placing the card inside her locker. She had expected questions, perhaps even trouble. She had never expected gratitude. At that very moment, across the city, Daniel quietly entered Damien's office carrying one final report. Richard Ellison has requested a private breakfast meeting tomorrow morning, he said. Damien looked up calmly. Interesting. Daniel nodded. He says it is about expanding the partnership. Damien folded his hands together and gave the slightest smile. Then tomorrow we shall discover whether he wants to discuss the future or whether he is trying to protect the past. The breakfast meeting took place the next morning in a quiet private dining room overlooking the river, where sunlight reflected across the water and every detail suggested another routine conversation between longtime business partners. Richard Ellison arrived precisely on time, smiling with the easy confidence of a man who believed years of trust could answer questions before they were ever asked. He greeted Damien warmly, shook his hand, and complimented the view as though nothing unusual had happened during the previous 48 hours. Damien welcomed him with the same calm courtesy he offered every respected guest. Fresh coffee was served, breakfast menus were placed on the table, and for several minutes the discussion revolved around charitable donations, local development projects, and the steady growth of several shared investments. Anyone observing from another table would have seen nothing more than two successful businessmen planning another productive year. Only Daniel, seated quietly near the window reviewing documents on a tablet, understood that every ordinary sentence was buying time for the truth to arrive. Richard eventually leaned forward with an enthusiastic smile. I have been thinking about expanding our partnership into 3 additional states, he said. The opportunities are remarkable, and I believe we should move quickly before competitors recognize the market. Damien listened politely before setting his coffee cup back onto its saucer. Expansion is always worth discussing, he replied evenly. But trust must grow at the same pace as opportunity. Richard laughed softly. After 15 years together, I hope trust is the one thing we never need to question. Damien met his eyes without any sign of anger. I used to believe that. The smile on Richard's face faded only slightly. Before he could respond, Daniel walked over and quietly placed a neatly organized folder in front of Damien. No dramatic gestures followed. No raised voices interrupted the peaceful atmosphere. Damien simply opened the folder and slowly turned several pages. Financial transfers, consulting agreements, meeting schedules, security photographs, and corporate ownership records rested side by side in perfect chronological order. Each page by itself appeared ordinary. Together, they formed a story that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Damien gently rotated the folder across the table until it faced Richard. Please take your time, he said. Richard's confident expression gradually disappeared as he reviewed the documents one by one. He recognized signatures, payment authorizations, calendar entries, and business records that could not easily be explained away. For several long moments, neither man spoke. The silence carried far more weight than accusations ever could. Finally, Richard looked up. You investigated me. Damien answered with complete honesty. I investigated unusual circumstances. The evidence simply led to you. Richard lowered his eyes again. You could have confronted me immediately. I could have, Damien replied. Instead, I wanted facts before conclusions. Richard slowly closed the folder. The confidence that had accompanied him into the restaurant had been replaced by quiet disappointment, not only in the situation before him, but perhaps in himself. I made decisions that I convinced myself were temporary, he admitted softly. I believed I could correct them before anyone noticed. Damien listened without interruption. Good intentions do not erase hidden choices, he said. They only postpone accountability. Richard gave a slow nod because he knew the statement was true. Damien folded his hands calmly. The partnership ends today. Independent auditors will review every shared account. Any financial responsibility will be handled through the proper legal and professional process. No exceptions. Richard accepted the decision without argument. As he quietly stood to leave, he paused beside the table. May I ask one question? Damien nodded. Richard looked at him thoughtfully. What made you begin looking? Damien's answer came without hesitation. A woman serving drinks decided that another person's safety mattered more than her own comfort. Richard remained silent for several seconds before offering a faint, regretful smile. Then he walked away, leaving behind an untouched cup of coffee and a partnership that had quietly ended long before either man entered the room that morning. 3 weeks passed, and the city slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. But the quiet changes set in motion by one courageous decision continued unfolding beneath the surface. Independent auditors completed their review with complete transparency, confirming a pattern of financial decisions that required formal correction through established legal and corporate procedures. Business partnerships were reorganized, new compliance standards were introduced, and every recommendation was implemented publicly rather than behind closed doors. Newspapers described the transition as an example of responsible leadership during difficult circumstances, though very few people understood how the entire process had truly begun. Alicia certainly did not. She continued working evening shifts at the Velvet Room, arriving 15 minutes early every day, greeting coworkers with the same warm smile, and serving every guest with the same care she had always believed honest work deserved. She never spoke about the handwritten note, never mentioned Damien Russo to anyone, and quietly assumed that chapter of her life had ended the moment he walked out of the lounge that night. Then, on a peaceful Tuesday afternoon, the manager approached her once again carrying another cream-colored envelope. "Someone requested that I hand this directly to you," he said with a curious smile. Alicia thanked him and opened it after finishing a customer's order. Inside, she found a formal invitation requesting her presence at the Russo Community Foundation headquarters the following morning at 10 o'clock. No explanation accompanied the invitation, only a brief handwritten sentence beneath the printed message. "Your courage deserves to be recognized in person." Unsure what to expect, Alicia arrived the next morning wearing a simple navy blue business suit she had borrowed from her older sister. The foundation occupied a beautifully restored brick building overlooking a public park where families gathered beneath tall oak trees. Volunteers welcomed visitors with genuine kindness, and photographs displayed along the entrance hallway highlighted scholarships, neighborhood improvement projects, hospitality training programs, and emergency assistance for service workers facing unexpected hardship. Alicia had never imagined that Damien's name appeared beside so many community efforts. A receptionist escorted her into a bright conference room where Damien and Daniel were already waiting. Damien stood as she entered and greeted her with the same respectful courtesy he had shown every employee they had met. "Thank you for coming," he said warmly. Alicia smiled nervously. "Thank you for inviting me." After they sat down, Damien placed a small framed photograph on the table. It showed an older woman wearing a housekeeping uniform while smiling proudly beside a young boy no older than 10. Alicia looked at the picture with curiosity. "My mother," Damien explained softly. "She cleaned hotel rooms for more than 25 years. She taught me that dignity belongs to every honest profession, whether people notice or not." Alicia looked at the photograph again before quietly nodding. "My father believed the same thing." Damien smiled. Then perhaps they would have been friends. For several peaceful moments, they shared stories about parents who valued integrity more than recognition. Damien then slid another folder across the table, but unlike the documents from his breakfast meeting with Richard, this folder contained no financial records or investigations. Inside were plans for expanding the Foundation's hospitality initiative, including mentorship programs, emergency support resources, leadership workshops, and scholarships for bartenders, servers, housekeepers, and hotel staff seeking career advancement. Damien looked directly at Alicia. "These programs help thousands of hardworking people every year," he said. "We have talented administrators, generous donors, and experienced advisors. What we do not have is someone who truly understands the people we are trying to serve." Alicia looked up in surprise as Damien continued. "I would like you to join the foundation as Director of Hospitality Outreach. Not because you warned me that evening, but because your character proved you already lead by example long before anyone was watching." Alicia sat speechless, realizing that the smallest decision she had ever made was quietly opening the largest door she had ever imagined. 1 year later, the ballroom of the city's annual Hospitality Excellence Summit was filled with hundreds of bartenders, hotel employees, restaurant managers, housekeepers, servers, and young students hoping to build meaningful careers through honest work. Bright morning sunlight poured through tall windows, reflecting across polished wooden floors and neatly arranged rows of chairs. Large photographs displayed stories of scholarship recipients, successful mentorship programs, and community projects that had transformed the lives of hard-working families throughout the region. Standing near the center of the stage, Alicia Brooks adjusted the microphone with the same quiet confidence she once carried behind the walnut bar at the Velvet Room. Her navy blue suit had replaced her bartender's uniform, but nothing about her warmth or humility had changed. As Director of Hospitality Outreach for the Russo Community Foundation, she had helped launch training initiatives in dozens of cities, created emergency assistance programs for hospitality workers facing unexpected hardships, and built partnerships with local businesses that believed opportunity should never depend on someone's job title. Looking across the audience, Alicia saw faces that reminded her of her own journey. Some looked exhausted after working overnight shifts. Others carried notebooks filled with dreams they had not yet spoken aloud. She smiled gently before beginning. "There was a time when I believed that the best way to do my job was to remain invisible," she said. "I thought success meant serving people so well that no one ever noticed I was there. Then one ordinary evening taught me something I will never forget. Every person has the power to change another life simply by choosing courage over comfort." The room became completely silent. Alicia never mentioned private investigations, hidden conversations, or business partnerships. She did not speak about fear. She spoke about responsibility, kindness, and the importance of protecting others even when no reward seemed possible. Her words felt genuine because they were built from experience rather than rehearsed speeches. Many people quietly wiped tears from their eyes as they recognized pieces of their own lives inside her story. At the back of the ballroom, away from the cameras and applause, Damien Russo stood beside Daniel, listening with quiet pride. Neither man sought recognition. The foundation's logo appeared on the event program, but Damien had declined every invitation to introduce the keynote speaker. He believed the stage belonged entirely to Alicia because she had earned it long before anyone offered her a title. Daniel smiled as the audience rose to its feet in a long standing ovation. "You changed her life," he said softly. Damien gently shook his head. "No," he replied. "She changed her own life the moment she decided that another person's well-being mattered more than her own convenience. I simply made certain that courage did not go unnoticed." As the applause continued, several young hospitality workers formed a line to thank Alicia personally, sharing stories about scholarships they had received, new careers they had begun, and confidence they had found because someone believed in them when they were ready to give up. Watching those conversations unfold, Damien quietly realized that the greatest return on any investment was never measured in dollars or buildings, but in the lives strengthened by compassion. Before leaving the ballroom, he glanced once more toward the stage where Alicia continued greeting every person with the same sincere smile she had offered customers behind the bar a year earlier. Her position had changed, her influence had grown, but her character remained exactly the same. Damien smiled, adjusted his jacket, and walked quietly toward the exit without waiting for anyone to notice. Outside, the afternoon sun filled the city streets with warm light, and life continued as it always had. Yet somewhere inside that busy city, countless people would soon benefit from one simple decision made by a bartender who refused to ignore her conscience. And on that day, everyone who heard her story remembered that true greatness is never defined by power alone, but by the quiet courage to protect another human being when no one expects it.